The Seahawks have named their 53-man roster. Wanted to give some reaction to that, what I think about it, what I think the next moves could be. So let's get into it. Going to share the screen here. So I'm using field goals because they've got a nice, easy breakdown. This is the roster, essentially. As you can see, Geno Smith and Sam Howell, the two quarterbacks. No surprise that PJ Walker was cut. They only keep 3 running backs, which means George Alani was cut. Still clearly hoped to get him back on the practice squad because he had a fantastic preseason. A receiver, 6 receivers, DK Metcalf, Tyler Lockett, Jackson Smith and Jigba, Jake Bobo were never in doubt. I think the contract structure of Laviska Shenault's deal meant that he was never going to be cut. And they've gone with Derek Young. They cut D. Eskridge, Aesop Winston, Cody White, 3 players who at times in the preseason had an impact there. They've cut them. They keep Derek Young. At tight end, no big surprises. Jack Westover's been hurt. Tyler Mabry's done a decent job from the practice squad over the years, but it was always going to be Fant, Brown, Russell, and Barner, who's done very little in his first camp and preseason. But having spent a 4th-round pick on him, it was unlikely they were going to cut him. And then 11 offensive linemen. There's a bit of a surprise there. They've kept a couple of the rookies, Lamea and Jarrell. They obviously see some potential in those 2 players. I think Jalen Sundle is sort of the big shock from this group. Cutting Raekwon O'Neal, cutting McClendon Curtis amongst the names there. Perhaps the biggest surprises, and Abe Lucas on the pup list. And then when you look at the defense, no big surprises with the defensive line, although I thought Mario Kendricks played well against the Browns. Cam Young still on the pup. Hopefully he can come back soon. Linebacker Jamie Sheriff was probably the one, and I know when Darrell Taylor went, quite a few of us, were saying, well, they've got young players. They've got Nelson Caesar. They've got Jamie Sheriff, who are playing well. Maybe they could step up to it. Neither player makes the 53-man roster. Sheriff's played very well in preseason and had a good camp by all accounts, but doesn't make it. At inside linebacker, not a surprise that John Rattigan was cut because they're going to try and presumably get him back on a lower salary. They may well have tried to negotiate with him to get that salary down, and for whatever reason, it's not worked out. He ends up getting cut. But Patrick O'Connell played well against the Browns. Michael Barrett's been cut, only just traded for him, but obviously they've had a look and, they clearly don't think that he's going to be a big special teamer for them right away. I'm guessing they'll try and get him back on the practice squad. Drake Thomas, though, does make it. Cornerbacks, the DJ James, I thought that was a bit of a surprising pick when it was made. He's been cut again. We'll presumably try and get him back on the practice squad. Artie Burns has been cut, so they're going to risk him potentially going somewhere else. D. Williams makes it as basically a return man. I don't think they're ever going to... If he's playing cornerback for Seattle this year, they've got some serious injury problems there. And then at safety, I think Tyler Carter's a good player, and I do think that Marquise Blair, there's always been a player in him for me, but I don't think he did enough in camp to shove his way in there. And, Cody Bryant, Kevin Wallace have played well, and Rayshawn Jenkins and Julian Love. It's good to see Rayshawn Jenkins is not sort of put on any IR lists or anything like that. So hopefully he's going to be healthy, and then nothing with the special teams. So that's the group. So the big thought, my big takeaway. Someone got in the comment section, I think it was in my last video, saying, "Well, you've never played football, so it's not a surprise that you think that the preseason games are boring and pointless." And, I still feel that way because they don't have preseason games in college football. Uchenna Nwosu doesn't get injured because of a stupid block from Wyatt Teller. If there's no preseason games, I think scrimmages and the dual practices that these teams do with each other is sufficient. I'd like to see a situation in the future where we don't have to have 3 preseason games. People saying, well, they're vitally important for some of these players fighting for a roster spot. Well, how can that be the case then? Because George Alani played his arse off against the Browns, gets cut. D. Eskridge got a great kick return against the Browns, gets cut. Aesop Winston and Cody White have played very well in preseason, cut. And Derek Young makes the roster. I wouldn't have expected, like anybody else, for Jalen Sundle to make it. Why is he there? It's not because he's shone in preseason. In the preseason, gets fight for a spot and really earned it over somebody else. They cut Jamie Sheriff, who had as good a preseason performance as anybody, and they've cut him. They don't protect him. They're going to let him test the market, see if he can go and get claimed, and if not, he'll be back on the practice squad. Artie Burns has played well. They're willing to risk losing Artie Burns, or the injury might play a part in that, that he picked up in the last game, but he's not made it either. And Drake Thomas, who no one's been talking about, has made it. So I genuinely think, we go into these preseason games like, oh, so-and-so's trying to win a spot and so-and-so played well and he might make it. The truth is we can't judge based on preseason games. And we can't judge as spectators of camp, whether you're a fan or a media member. You go to camp and you can say, this player played well. Or you get a preseason game, this player played well. What the teams are actually thinking, there's so much more that goes into it than that. Like, they've clearly looked at, this is the offensive line, for example. They've kept Michael Jarrell and LeMayer because they clearly think there are players in there. And because the league is looking constantly for offensive linemen, there's a greater chance that if they cut either of those players, someone will give them a try. They'll stash them on a roster. Maybe a team that's not very good, that's looking for good young talent, might just take them and go, well, we'll have a look. And we're prepared to put them on the roster for a year. And they're keeping them because they don't want to lose those players. They feel like they want to develop them and spend some time with them, and they want to keep them. Now, neither of those players, touch wood, is going to be playing for the Seahawks, this year. But they're protecting them over someone like McClendon Curtis, who's shown that he's versatile, that he can play a number of different positions. But he's been cut. They've not kept him, even though it would have, I think a lot of people would have assumed he would make it. But that's just, again, it's not predictable based on what you're seeing, the reps, the performances. They've cut Jamie Sheriff, like I said, who's performed as well as anybody, who's done as much to deserve and grafted to get that spot, from like delivering beer as he said he was before getting his opportunity, and then gets that chance and delivers and performs and earns a roster spot. Yeah, he hasn't. He's going to be on the practice squad. I think Taya Carter has played with such intensity and speed and aggression, and has played like you want your safeties to play. He's not made it. Like people like Drake Thomas have made it, who we've barely talked about. So, why is Sundle on the roster? Sundle's on the roster because Connor Williams is an injury now. That's my guess. Connor Williams is out. So they are keeping an extra center if in week one you need a backup. And maybe Connor Williams isn't going to play week one. Or maybe he is and they just want that extra bit of insurance there. That's why he's made it, I think. So it's why I never do a 53-man roster projection. I never, I don't do them as articles. I don't do them as videos because I just don't think there's any real insight to offer there. Like, I can talk about draft players because I can watch the games and I can watch them either on YouTube, or I can watch them on the TV and see these players, and I can give you an opinion. But I can't really give an opinion on what Mike McDonald and his staff, when they get around the room and go, okay, we need to keep this player. And with John Schneider and his staff, we need to keep this player because we like him and we want to give him a couple of years in the system or whatever. But we might lose him because this team need offensive line depth, so they might steal him off us, so we'll keep him. Or, hey, look, we're not sure about Connor Williams. We're not going to talk about it in press conferences, so none of the public know about it, and therefore the opponents that we're facing. But we're going to keep Sundell because we need that extra center in there. Jamie Sheriff, he's played really well and he's performed and he's producing, but what is his actual ceiling? Do you expect him to be still in the league in a year's time, 3 years' time, or whatever? Maybe he is the kind of player that can show well against third stringers in fourth quarter, but they don't actually expect that he's going to be able to do it against, first stringers, when someone like Travis Gibson, in fairness to him, has had a productive season in his career and was signed by the Jaguars with the intention to be the primary backup to their 2-star pass rushers. So, it's hard to sort of project and understand what they're going to do. And therefore, that's kind of why it's a bit of a fool's errand to guess what they're going to do. So I think there are some good pieces of news from this. Chenna Nwosu not being on IR is a good thing, because I think the report was 2 to 6 weeks is the kind of time frame they're working on. If he's not on IR, that would suggest that it's perhaps nearer the 2 than the 6, because they could have put him on IR and he would have missed like the first month. But now, he could be back perhaps like, let's say, week 3, and therefore worth having him week 3. That's when it really gets going. You've got two teams that you'd say are beatable teams in the first 2 weeks, and you've got the Dolphins coming in. It'd be great to have Chenna Nwosu back for that game. I do wonder, as I mentioned, about what happens to Connor Williams and whether he plays week 1 if they're keeping that extra centre. So, and Rayshon Jenkins not being on any kind of list for injuries or keeping an extra safety suggests that there's good news there. And likewise for Draymond Jones, that they've not really felt the need to go and get somebody else on there to protect against him. It looks like all those guys are going to be there. So the Seahawks in relatively good health going into the season. The kind of headline of Chenna and Wosu may have distracted from that and the fact that the Tyler Lockett's and the Joneses and stuff have not been practicing, but it looks like they're in a pretty good shape to begin the season, which is better than some teams, like the Vikings losing the rookie quarterback and stuff like that. So it all seems to be ready for the season, which is going to be here, week on Sunday, and very much looking forward to that. But I do think this is a reminder that the big calls on rosters and roster construction, it happens in March and April, not in August. I don't think we've not seen that many trades. I don't think we're going to see many waiver claims. There never really is. I think that always gets a bit overrated. Players who are cut by other teams tend to be cut for a reason. And, maybe the top teams are very deep. A couple of their players get poached, start from Seattle in the early years of Schneider and Carroll. I don't think that's necessarily going to be the case again. So a lot of the what's going to win your games in Seattle is going to be the key players, the coaches, the staff, the execution of those key players. It's not so much the guys who fill out a 53-man roster and might be stuck on special teams for the most part. Not stuck on special teams, but participating on special teams. In terms of waivers, I've looked at every team's cut down, and it's quite an arduous task. And there's probably names that I might glossed over, or if I could have spent a bit more time on it, I would have thought, oh yeah, you know what, they'd be worth a look. But I did jot down some names that I thought, man, they might be intriguing. I think depending on how Travis Gibson gets on and depending on Chenna Owosu's injury, Carl Lawson was linked with Seattle. He's not somebody you sign now, but in a couple of weeks, if he's still available, depending on the state of the pass rush and the health of your players, could he be somebody you get in for a workout, just touch base with him maybe? I don't think that would be the end of the world. KJ Henry, who I thought his tape at Clemson was really good, and then he tested appallingly pre-draft, and his stock sank like a stone. Apparently, he's had a really good camp for the Washington Commanders and was a big surprise cut. So is he worth a workout? Do you get him in? You sort of see where he is athletically, see if he's improved on those workout numbers. Is there a bit more upside than we thought after the testing pre-draft? He's had a good camp. The Commanders, again, surprisingly moved on. Is he worth a workout? I'm not saying sign him to the 53-man roster. I'm just saying, do you bring him in and have a look? I think it'd be worth, at least, again, sort of having a look, see what you've got in Matt Hennessy, who's been cut by the Eagles. He's center, former third-round pick, ended up at the Eagles after leaving Atlanta, I believe. And, as a backup center, bit of competition, practice squad player maybe. Do you bring him in and have a workout there and have a look? Ricky Stromberg was a cut. He's been cut after just a year in Washington. He was the third-round pick a year ago. Obviously, the new GM's come in. He's just gone, not for me, and has moved on. I quite liked Ricky Stromberg going into that draft. So I don't think I'd necessarily take him in round 3. But is he somebody that you give a workout to, see if there's a chance to get him on your practice squad instead of somebody else's, especially with some of the concerns around the center position in Seattle with the injury situation with Williams. Lewis Seen's one that, I really liked Lewis Seen, and I think I've told this story before, that I liked him going into the draft. He was drafted in round 1 by the Vikings. I spoke to somebody with far more knowledge and experience of scouting than myself, and he thought Lewis Seen was a 4th-round pick and was not a fan at all. And obviously then he got the injury before his rookie season, and it was like a compound fracture. It was like a really bad injury, I think. And then he's struggled to get back, and he played something like 10 games last year. He got injured right before the start of the season last year and came back at 10 games. The GM who drafted him has cut him already after 2 years, which is never a good sign. But I just thought he was a great hitter. He's a good athlete, played very well at Georgia. Again, I'm not saying go and bring him into the 53-man roster. I'm saying, do you bring him in for a workout, physical? Have a look there. I think I remember a few teams who feel that way. Like when players like that get drafted early, there were typically other teams who liked him and will have a look. So I wonder if the Seahawks will do that at some point. I'd look at Jack Plummer for the practice squad if you could get him, the quarterback. He not somebody that I rated that highly going into the draft, and I believe he had a couple of crappy preseason performances before. I thought a fantastic performance against the Bills, second and third stringers in the final preseason game. If you go and find the highlights of that game, he lit it up. It was a really good performance from him. And given that you are going to have to sign a quarterback to the practice squad, and PJ Walker did not play well, I don't know. Can you get him over from Carolina? Do you want to? They've got to get a quarterback from somewhere, and I just think maybe Plummer's got a bit more about him than PJ Walker did. So practice squad maybe. And then the other name was that he's not been cut, but Brady Henderson mentioned John Ridgway III, who was at Washington, and there was talk that they might try and trade him Washington before the deadline. Then he made the roster; he's not been cut. So part of me wonders whether that is a deal to be done. But Brady Henderson is the top beat reporter in Seattle, and he was the one reporting everything today. He's probably pretty much the only one who was reporting who was getting caught and stuff like that. And if he has said that the Seahawks are going to be looking for another nose tackle to back up Hankins. So take that as gospel if Brady Henderson's saying it. And if he's connecting them to John Ridgway, I think there's a chance that maybe there is a deal to be done there for a throwaway pick over the coming days. So we will see. He's a big guy, big tackle, and we will see if there's a chance of that. And, I've seen people suggesting other nose tackles who've been caught. The Siaka Ika's one I've seen quite a few people mention on Twitter. I thought he was overrated pre-draft. Like people were talking about him for the first round, the second round. I think he went in the third round in the end. I was never impressed with him. I thought he was a poor player, a poor watch, a frustrating watch. And I'm not surprised he's been cut so soon. And he's not somebody that I'd be thinking, go and get him to play nose tackle. Not for me. So I know a lot of people have been sort of talking about him, but that's not one that I'd be interested in. So there we go. And I don't think it's worth stressing about a backup nose tackle. Often go and get somebody. Like just go and get a big body. It's somebody's going to back up Hankins, not somebody who's necessarily going to have to play a massive role here. And if Hankins went out, they'd probably just play Jaron Reed in that spot a lot more. And it's just about having that depth and that protection there. So there we go. They're my thoughts on the 53-man roster and what might happen next. I think just to conclude, by all accounts, the Seahawks look like they've had a good training camp, a good preseason. They're in reasonable health. So let's bring it on. Bring on week one. Fascinated to see how they're going to get on against Denver and Bo Nix. Excited to see what a Mike McDonald defense looks like. And one of the things I'm also really interested in is how it's going to change. Because you can't, he will have ideas and philosophies that he's going to use in week one, but you can't just stick to that all season. It's going to become quite predictable. So how he transitions through a year, which he's a creative coach, he will be doing that. I think it's going to be as interesting to watch as anything to see how the Seahawks kind of pivot and keep teams guessing. And I'm also really interested to see how he gets on against the other NFC West teams, because the Seahawks for the last few years been pushed around by the Niners. They were humiliated on Thanksgiving Day. I was there, having traveled 5,000 miles to watch that shit show. And that can't be allowed to happen again. So fascinated to see how he's going to get on against them. Fascinated to see how he's going to get on against the Rams. Fascinated to see how they get against the Detroit Lions, because the Seahawks have had the Detroit Lions number for a few years. And is that going to carry on now that Mike McDonald's here? So can't wait for the new season. Very excited. Looking forward to it. Let me know what you think about everything. Comment section. Don't forget to like the video. SeahawksDraftBlog.com for more analysis. I'll see you next time.